Elena stood in the shadows outside Lucian's grand estate, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She had been watching him for weeks now, studying his patterns, his routines, and most importantly, his collection. Lucian was a famed art collector, known for his eye for detail and taste for the rarest pieces. Elena, a skilled thief, was fascinated by his collection, but even more fascinated by the man himself. Tonight was her night. She had planned her moves carefully, knowing every guard's rotation, every camera angle. Her heartbeat quickened as she slipped through the iron gates, moving swiftly toward the main house. It wasn't her first time stealing, but this time felt different. This wasn't just about the jewels or art pieces, this was about Lucian. Once inside, Elena marveled at the lavish decor, the priceless art adorning the walls, and the glass cases holding treasures she'd only seen in magazines. But her gaze lingered on Lucian's study, the one room she had never dared enter. She hesitated, taking a steadying breath, then slipped inside. The walls were lined with shelves of leather-bound books, and at the center of the room was a polished mahogany desk with a single framed photograph. Elena moved closer, her eyes on the photograph. It was Lucian, smiling with a woman she assumed was his late wife. Her curiosity piqued, but a slight noise from down the hallway snapped her back to reality. She reached for a small glass paperweight on the desk, her prize for the night. Just a simple token, one Lucian would surely notice missing. As she crept back outside, Elena felt the thrill of the chase like never before. This wasn't a simple theft, it was a game. She'd leave clues for him, little pieces of her identity for him to piece together. She wanted him to notice her, to know she had been there, silently challenging him. Back in her hideout, Elena examined the paperweight, running her fingers over its smooth surface. She could feel her obsession growing, deepening. It wasn't just about his collection, it was about Lucian himself. Her mind raced with plans for her next visit, eager to be near him, to make herself known without ever being seen. In her world of solitude, where trust was scarce and friendships were non-existent, Lucian became her silent obsession. She imagined his reaction when he discovered the missing object, imagined the confusion and curiosity that would flash across his face. She was playing a dangerous game, but the thrill of it made her feel more alive than ever before. For Elena, this was only the beginning. The next morning, Lucian sat in his study, sipping his coffee as he took in the familiar comfort of his home. However, something felt different. He scanned the room, trying to identify what was out of place. His gaze landed on his desk. His paperweight was missing. Frowning, he leaned closer, sure he had left it there just last night. This wasn't just any paperweight. It was a gift from his late wife, a small glass orb with swirling colors, one of the few personal items he kept in his study. Lucian's instincts kicked in. He had always prided himself on security, both in his home and in his high-profile art collection. Yet someone had slipped in and taken it. It was a small item, but the act itself was a threat. He felt a prickling sense of intrusion, of someone daring to invade his private world. Unsettled, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He reviewed the security footage from the previous night, carefully watching the monitors for any sign of an intruder. There. A shadow slipped through the halls, too quick to catch on camera, but unmistakably human. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. A professional, he thought grimly. Meanwhile, Elena, safe in her hideout, watched her laptop with a sense of satisfaction. She had hacked into Lucian's security feed, and as she saw his reaction, she smiled. She was inside his world, her presence now an unspoken challenge. Her fascination grew as she watched him pace the room, his fingers lightly brushing over the place where the paperweight once sat. She could almost feel his frustration and intrigue through the screen. Her next move had to be calculated, subtle enough to keep him guessing, yet bold enough to fuel his curiosity. Elena knew she needed to up the ante to make sure Lucian couldn't brush her off as just another thief. She decided to return to his estate, but this time she would take something more personal, something he would be certain to notice. Days passed, and Lucian found himself unable to focus, distracted by the mystery thief who had breached his defenses. The police had offered little help, brushing off his concerns since nothing of significant value was taken. But Lucien couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Someone had targeted him, someone bold enough to taunt him with their presence. He started to look over his shoulder more often, a sense of vulnerability creeping into his normally confident demeanor. He doubled his security, hired more guards, and set up additional cameras in his study. Whoever this was, Lucien would make sure they didn't strike twice. But as he fortified his defenses, Elena only became more determined. She thrived on the thrill of the chase, savoring the way Lucien's carefully constructed world seemed to crumble under her touch. And so, with her next plan in mind, she set off once more toward Lucien's estate, ready to leave another mark, a reminder that she was still watching and waiting. Elena moved under the cover of night, her every step calculated as she slipped into Lucien's estate once more. This time, her target was a piece even more precious than the paperweight, his late wife's locket displayed on a small pedestal in his bedroom. She had seen him glance at it through her hacked feed, and she knew that taking it would strike a deeper chord. She made her way through Lucien's heightened security measures. Guards patrolled the halls, and new cameras had been installed, but Elena knew the estate well by now. Her heart raced as she evaded the guards, her instincts sharp, and her movements swift. As she reached the bedroom, she noticed the faintest scent of Lucien's cologne in the air. It added to the thrill of her presence in his private sanctuary, her footsteps nearly silent on the thick carpet. Elena picked up the locket, letting its cool metal rest in her gloved palm. For a moment, she felt a twinge of empathy. She imagined how deeply Lucien must cherish this reminder of his wife. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. This was her game, and she needed to keep him on edge. With the locket safely stashed away, she retraced her steps and disappeared into the night as quietly as she had come. The next morning, Lucien found himself gazing at the empty spot where the locket had been. A cold realization sank in. She had returned. This wasn't just a one-time theft. This was personal. His hand clenched in frustration. Whoever this intruder was, she was bold, daring, and precise. This was someone who knew how to play mind games. Lucien's curiosity began to mix with irritation. No one had ever dared to target him repeatedly like this. He called in additional security experts and informed them about the stolen items, demanding an explanation for how someone could breach his home so easily. His new team suggested a variety of high-tech measures: infrared beams, more cameras, and an upgraded alarm system. But Lucien knew he needed to understand his enemy, not just fortify against them. It was time to take a different approach. That night, he stayed up late, waiting in the darkened corners of his home, hoping to catch her in the act. He didn't tell his security team about his plan. He wanted this encounter to be one-on-one. He wanted to see her, to understand why she had chosen him as her target. Hours passed, and the house remained silent, save for the occasional murmur of the guards outside. But Elena was already one step ahead. She had been watching Lucien through her hacked cameras, sensing his growing obsession with catching her. She knew he would lie in wait, anticipating her next move. Smiling to herself, she crafted a message on a small slip of paper. "Isn't the thrill what you wanted, Lucien?" Then she slipped into his study, placing the note on his desk before vanishing once more. In the morning, Lucien found the note, his heart pounding as he read it. She knew him, understood the thrill he secretly sought. And now, more than ever, he was determined to find her. Lucien held Eleanor's note, his fingers gripping the edges tightly. She had been right here, in his study, close enough to see his most personal items and even closer to mocking his sense of control. The message was subtle, yet unnerving. She knew him better than any thief should. Frustration and intrigue tangled in his mind, each competing to take the upper hand. But Lucien was a man used to controlling every outcome, and he decided to play her game. He would let her come to him, and this time he would be prepared. He cleared his schedule for the week and dismissed most of his security team, keeping only a handful of guards he trusted implicitly. This wasn't just about protecting his belongings anymore. It was about meeting his mysterious intruder face to face. Meanwhile, Eleanor watched Lucien through her surveillance access. She could sense his mounting anticipation, his desire to confront her. This was exactly what she wanted, to get close enough to uncover the secrets behind his wealth and connections. Lucien wasn't just a rich man, he was powerful, with influence that stretched into the shadows. Eleanor needed to know who he was beneath the facade, and she felt a rush of satisfaction as she realized how well her plan was working. She spent the next day planning her next entry into Lucien's estate. This time, she aimed for something that would force him to respond directly. Her target, a rare artifact on display in his private collection, an ancient dagger that had once belonged to a notorious warrior. It was priceless, and its loss would undoubtedly demand Lucien's attention. That night, Elena slipped into the estate, her movements careful and measured. She avoided the guards she knew he'd strategically positioned, and as she approached the display room, she was so close now, closer than ever, to exposing Lucien's hidden world. As she lifted the glass cover and reached for the dagger, she felt a slight shift in the air. Lucien stepped out from the shadows, his gaze piercing and unwavering. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice calm, yet carrying an edge of intensity. Elena's heartbeat quickened, but she held her composure, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Just admiring the collection," she replied smoothly, her voice steady. Lucien's eyes scanned her, sizing her up. There was something familiar in her confidence, a fire that matched his own. "You've been clever," he admitted, circling her slowly. "But what is it you truly want?" Eleanor smirked, taking a step back, keeping her escape route in mind. "Maybe just a little thrill," she replied, "or maybe you have something I need." Lucien raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her words. "And if I don't hand it over?" "Then I'll just keep coming back," Elena replied, a hint of challenge in her tone. She tossed the dagger back onto the display, sending him a final glance before slipping into the shadows. Lucien watched her vanish, a mix of frustration and fascination in his gaze. He had met his match. Lucien's pulse thrummed with a mix of anger and intrigue. Elena had slipped through his fingers once again, leaving only a trail of frustration in her wake. This thief had nerve, but it was her purpose that gnawed at him most. She hadn't stolen anything substantial, yet her presence was a deliberate invasion. She seemed to be telling him, "I know who you are, and I'm not afraid of you." After the encounter, Lucien tightened his security further and installed more discreet surveillance, determined to catch her next time. The more he thought about her, the more she became a mystery he needed to solve. Why was she doing this? Was it a vendetta or something more sinister? He went through his past, combing for anyone he might have wronged, but no answers surfaced. Meanwhile, Eleanor was back at her small hidden apartment, assessing the night's events. She had pushed Lucien further, and she could feel his frustration building. Now he'd be on edge, forced to keep searching for answers, but she had no plans to make it easy. She was finally close to discovering the truth about him and his mysterious wealth. The more she dug into his past, the more inconsistencies she uncovered. Lucien was tied to businesses that didn't add up, connections to powerful people who were rarely seen but always influential. Something dark lay beneath his polished exterior, and she would be the one to reveal it. The next night, Eleanor prepared for yet another visit to Lucien's estate. This time, her goal wasn't to steal, but to gather evidence. She had noticed his heightened security and adjusted her approach. Dressed in dark attire and armed with new tools, she slipped past the guards, her every movement calculated and quiet. Inside, Lucien was restless, unable to shake the feeling that she would return. He paced his study, his focus shifting between the security cameras and the dimly lit grounds outside. Just as he sat down, he noticed a shadow flicker across the monitor. She was back. Eleanor moved quickly through the house, seeking the documents she'd read about in her research, files that would link Lucien to his shadowy associates and illegal dealings. She crept into his office, her gaze scanning for anything that could reveal his secrets. As she reached for a folder labeled with a name she recognized from her investigations, the light suddenly blazed to life, and Lucien stepped forward, blocking her exit. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice you sneaking in again?" he asked, his voice low but filled with tension. Eleanor held her ground, clutching the folder close to her chest. "I needed proof," she replied defiantly. Lucien smirked. "Proof of what? That you're clever, or that you have no idea who you're dealing with?" But Eleanor's eyes were resolute. "I know exactly who you are, Lucien, and I know what you're hiding." The confrontation felt like the culmination of a long battle, each of them holding secrets the other desperately wanted. They stared at each other, each unwilling to back down, each with more to lose than the other knew. Eleanor didn't flinch under Lucien's icy gaze, her fingers tightening on the folder she'd finally found. This was what she'd been searching for, the proof she needed to expose Lucien for who he truly was. But now, standing face to face with him, she realized just how dangerous he could be. Lucien took a step closer, his expression unreadable, a dark intensity in his eyes. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, Elena," he said slowly, his voice dripping with menace. "You think you can walk into my life, disrupt everything I've built, and walk away unscathed?" Elena lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. "I think it's time someone held you accountable, Lucien. You've hurt too many people to keep hiding in the shadows." A smirk flickered across Lucien's face. "Accountable?" he scoffed. "Do you think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing more than a thief, a petty criminal trying to expose someone beyond your reach." He took another step forward, forcing Eleanor to back up against the wall, but her resolve held. "I may have been a thief," she replied evenly, "but I have something you'll never understand. A purpose." For a brief moment, Lucien hesitated, the words seeming to strike a nerve. He narrowed his eyes, studying her, as though seeing her for the first time. "And what purpose would drive someone like you to risk your life?" Eleanor took a steadying breath. "Justice. For my family, for everyone who suffered because of you." Her voice was strong, each word carrying a weight she could no longer ignore. "I won't let you keep hiding behind your wealth and power." Lucien's face darkened. He reached out, grabbing her wrist, his grip firm and unyielding. "You have no idea what you're up against, Elena," he said, his voice a warning. "I've dealt with people much more dangerous than you." But she looked him straight in the eye, undeterred. "You're wrong, Lucien. You think you control everything, but you can't silence the truth forever." Just then, a noise echoed in the hallway outside, the sound of footsteps drawing closer. Lucien turned his head, momentarily distracted, and Eleanor seized the opportunity. She twisted out of his grip, clutching the folder tightly, and darted toward the door. Lucien cursed under his breath, lunging after her, but she was too quick. In an instant, she disappeared down the hall, her footsteps echoing through the mansion as she made her escape. Heart pounding, she navigated the dark corridors, her senses heightened, adrenaline driving her forward. Behind her, Lucien's enraged voice filled the silence, ordering his guards to capture her. But Elena was already steps ahead, her years of experience serving her well as she slipped through the shadows, evading capture at every turn. Finally, she burst through the side exit, gasping for air as she sprinted across the manicured lawns. She knew she only had moments before Lucien's men would be on her trail, but she wasn't leaving empty-handed this time. The folder in her arms held everything she needed to bring Lucien down. As she disappeared into the night, Elena knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, she held the upper hand. Elena found refuge in an old, abandoned warehouse by the river. As she caught her breath, she set the folder down on a dusty table, her fingers trembling as she flipped through its contents. Each page detailed Lucien's crimes, embezzlement, bribery, and a list of high-ranking officials he'd corrupted to keep his empire thriving. The sheer scale of his control was staggering, and with each document, her determination grew stronger. She knew this was her only chance to expose him, but going to the authorities would be a risk. Lucien's influence reached deep, even within law enforcement. She'd need to tread carefully, or she might end up silenced before the truth could ever come to light. Suddenly, the warehouse door creaked open, and Eleanor froze, instinctively reaching for the small knife she always kept in her boot. Her heart pounded as she strained her ears, ready to fight if she had to. But then a familiar figure stepped into the dim light, Alex, her trusted friend, and the only person who knew the full extent of her plan. "Elena," he whispered urgently, glancing behind him before closing the door. "Are you okay? I saw Lucien's men scouring the streets. They're searching everywhere for you." She nodded, relief washing over her. "I'm fine, but we don't have much time." "This," she said, gesturing to the folder, "is everything we need to bring him down." but I need your help to make sure this gets to the right hands." Alex scanned the documents, his eyes widening as he realized the gravity of what Elena had uncovered. "This is explosive. If we can get this to someone trustworthy, it could be enough to finally end Lucien's reign." They both knew the risks, but Alex's steady gaze reassured her. "I know someone in the press," he said slowly, "someone who's been trying to expose high-level corruption for years. They're independent, won't be swayed by Lucien's money." Elena considered it, realizing this might be their best shot. "Then we need to get this to them," she agreed. "But we have to move fast." Just as they were about to leave, Elena's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered cautiously. A cold, familiar voice filled the silence. "Elena, running won't save you." Lucien's voice was calm, taunting. "You may think you've outsmarted me, but you'll never escape. I'll find you, and when I do, I'll make you regret everything." Elena's grip tightened around the phone. "Your time is up, Lucien. Everything you've done will be exposed. You can't keep hiding behind your money and lies forever." He chuckled darkly. Brave words for a girl who's all alone. She hung up as she looked at Alex. "We have to go. Now." Together they slipped out of the warehouse, navigating through narrow alleys and side streets. Every shadow seemed to pulse with danger, every sound a reminder of Lucien's reach. But they pressed on, driven by a shared determination to see justice served. With each step, Elena knew she was closer to ending Lucien's control, no longer the hunted, but the hunter on the path to reclaiming her life. Elena and Alex moved swiftly, the weight of Lucien's crimes propelling them forward. They reached the rendezvous point, a quiet, run-down building on the city's outskirts where Alex's journalist contact, Marcus, waited for them. Marcus had built his career on exposing corruption, and as soon as he saw Elena with the folder, his expression sharpened with understanding. He knew the value of what she was holding and what it could mean for the city if exposed. Elena handed over the folder, her voice steady. "This is all the proof you'll need to bring Lucien down. He's protected, but if you get this out, the public outcry will be too strong for him to silence." Marcus took the folder, his eyes scanning the documents with a mixture of shock and determination. "This is incredible. With this, we can make his entire network crumble. But you need to be careful, Elena. He won't give up easily." "I know," she replied, a fire in her eyes, "but he's about to realize he can't control everyone." She and Alex watched as Marcus departed, promising to release the story within hours. Feeling both relief and unease, Elena and Alex left to lay low while Marcus's story hit the headlines. They knew Lucien's reaction would be swift and brutal, and Elena braced herself for a final confrontation. As they hid in a nearby alley, they noticed cars screeching to a halt on the street nearby. Lucien's men had arrived, scouring the area for any sign of her. "We need to draw them away from here," Alex whispered. "If they corner Marcus, he might never get a chance to publish." Elena nodded, her heart pounding with a newfound resolve. "I'll lure them away. This ends tonight, one way or another." Alex hesitated, but seeing the determination in her eyes, he knew she wouldn't back down. "Be careful, Elena." She gave him a small smile and disappeared into the shadows, deliberately leaving clues for Lucien's men to follow. She led them through the darkened streets, back to the abandoned warehouse where it had all begun. Her heart raced as she heard footsteps and voices echoing in the darkness, Lucien's men closing in. Finally, she heard Lucien's voice, calm but menacing. "Did you really think you could get away with this, Elena?" She stepped into the dim light, meeting his gaze head-on. "I didn't just think it. I made it happen. Your empire is crumbling, Lucien. People know the truth now." Lucien sneered. "You're just a thorn in my side, nothing more. I'll rebuild, with or without you." "You won't have the chance," Elena replied, her voice strong. "This is the end for you." At that moment, the sound of sirens blared in the distance. Lucien's men looked around, panic setting in as the police cars approached. Marcus had kept his promise. The story was out, and the authorities were responding. Lucien's face twisted in rage, but before he could react, the police stormed in, arresting him and his men. As they dragged him away, he locked eyes with Elena one last time, a mix of hatred and defeat. Elena watched him go, finally feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. She was free. With Alex by her side, she turned and walked away from the life she'd left behind, ready to embrace a future of her own making, leaving the past and Lucien in ruins.